Joining me now, firstly, Technology and Human Rights Director at Big Brother Watch, Silkie Carlo. Silkie, good morning.
Good morning.
Firstly, body cams used by the police force here in the county of Cumbria and across the UK. Why is this a concern for you and the body that you represent?
Well, there are two things that we would like to see before body-worn video rolled out across all police. And the first is that there should be a proof of purpose. So we need to see exactly why police feel that they need the cameras. When we did a study on this issue in August, we found that there was no data relating to the use of body-worn video in criminal proceedings. And the police today are saying that 10% of their recordings have been used as evidence, which seems a little low. Secondly, we would like to see some consistent guidelines on when they can be used. I think it's a no-brainer that officers who can use potentially lethal force, firearms officers armed with tasers, should have body-worn video. But what we're concerned about is police choosing when to turn the cameras on and when to turn them off, or filming, for example, inside people's homes when people are uncomfortable with that. So we really need to see some consistent guidelines on how police use these recording devices.
Can you see where I'm coming from here? And I'm sure many listeners to BBC Radio Cumbria listening into our conversation now are thinking, hang on, surely the idea of body-worn video cameras, that can only be a good thing. It means evidence can be caught on tape. And effectively, there are no discrepancies.
Well, we want to see those guidelines make sure that it is merely an evidence gathering tool rather than an intelligence gathering tool. The last thing we need is more surveillance. So, for example, it should be made absolutely crystal clear that there shouldn't be recording at protests, for example. And as I say, really, it shouldn't be down simply to an individual officer to choose when to turn the camera on or off. There needs to be some really clear guidelines to make sure it's fair on all sides.
The fact that officers wearing these cameras, again, going back to the research, they are less likely to use force or to fire a taser. Does that mean that the police are using excessive force in the first place, in your opinion?
That's a good question. And, my goodness, why do so many police officers have tasers? These are potentially lethal weapons. So, that is a separate and an enormous concern. But if there is a reduction in the use of tasers, and we look forward to seeing that evidence, that would be a good thing, and that would be an example of a good use of body-worn video, where it can help to hold the police to account too.
It's interesting that you mentioned proof of purpose, and something that is of great concern to many. Is there an issue with privacy here? The idea of police officers, for example, entering somebody's home, filming victims, children, vulnerable people, basically.
That's exactly our concern. And at Big Brother Watch, we have had contact from people who are very distressed that there was a police call out and the police were filming inside their home, despite repeatedly being asked not to. So clearly people do feel intruded on by this kind of recording, which is exactly why there needs to be much clearer guidelines around when it's appropriate for police to turn the recording on.
Guidelines are very, very good. I can hear where you're coming from, Silkie, but a police officer, he or she, the switching on, the switching off of a camera, until they enter a building, until they find themselves in such a situation, they're not going to know whether the decision to switch on, switch off is the right or the wrong one to make. And if they find themselves in the middle of a situation, switching a camera on, switching a camera off, I would argue that would be possibly the last thing on their minds. There's a situation that they're trying to contain, possibly.
It's a good point. I'd certainly be interested to see if the evidence shows that police find the cameras burdensome. But I really think that there just does need to be some clear lines around when police should be turning on and off. Otherwise, if we have a permanent recording situation, police become walking CCTV cameras.
How long, in your opinion, then, before all aspects of life are caught on tape? Something I should imagine you and many others dread.
Yes, and we're very nearly at that point, if it hasn't already been passed. I mean, we are one of the most surveilled nations in the entire world. We also have the most authoritarian government surveillance regime of any democracy in history. So we are an incredibly surveilled nation. And I think body-worn video is a different situation. There is a potential for the technology to be good and to hold the police and suspects to account, but we have to do it right. And what we've seen at the moment is police forces spending well over £20 million on body-worn video without having that really clear proof of purpose and strict lines around when police do and do not use these cameras.
But the police would argue that these body-worn video cameras, if it's making their work easier, then it's to the good, surely.
Well, of course, we all want the police's work to be made easier.
We have a police force which is desperately overstretched at the best of times. If there's something that we can give, an aid that will make their work easier, surely that's got to be a good thing.
That would be right, but we can't cut corners on rights. And there has been a suggestion, for example, that body-worn cameras could be used to interview suspects on the spot, which clearly would obstruct access to a lawyer, for example, and the normal rights that one would expect. So yes, police are under pressure, but we simply can't be cutting corners on, such basic fundamental rights.
Fascinating, some of the points that you're raising this morning. Silkie, we're going to have to leave it there. We'll throw this one to listeners of BBC Radio Cumbria. Silkie Carlo there, Technology Human Rights Director at Big Brother Watch.